Welcome to the Immigrant Entrepreneurs Show, where our mission is to inspire, impact, and influence other immigrant entrepreneurs to follow their dreams and create the future they want. My guest today is a highly sought-after speaker, trainer, and coach known as Jim Carrey with a PhD. He has spoken to over 3,500 audiences worldwide and authored 16 books, including his latest, Leadership Begins with Motivation. He has co-founded the world's leading reading engagement program. Welcome to the show, Dr. Dr Brassell.
Thanks so much for having me, Ali, and thanks for spreading joy around the world. I love your audience. You and I are both passionate about the immigrant entrepreneurial experience and how to help people succeed. And just thanks for all that you do.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on, Danny. Danny, first and foremost, obviously, I would love to know what's your mission?
Oh, well, thank you on that, Ali. My mission is to bring joy back into education in the workplace. And I do that by addressing all four of the aspects of language development, which are communication skills of speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And so for writing, I've written, I'm now up to 17 books as of last week. Reading, like you said, I have the world's top reading engagement program that shows parents how to get their kids to read more, read better, and most importantly, to love reading. I speak over 100 days all around the world. I need to speak. You're in Lucerne right now in Switzerland, which is it really is my favorite place on the planet. It's just beautiful. I actually shouldn't publicize it. I don't want everybody going there because it's just so wonderful. And then finally, I work with entrepreneurs, business owners, and executives on how to create engaging, well-crafted presentations that get their audience to take the next step, whether that's to purchase their product or to donate to their cause or even to invest in their idea. So we can go whichever route you want today.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Sounds like a lot of things that I can learn myself on this interview, and I'm really excited for that. So by the way, Danny, you're an exception to the rule. We usually have most of the time or almost all the time, we have immigrant entrepreneurs on the show sharing their stories. But as I said, I also look for experts that can provide value to our audience. So that's the reason, or one of the reasons, we have you on the show today.
Well, thank you, Ali. And I should be able to get on just because I work with so many immigrant entrepreneurs. I was actually just using him as an example a couple of weeks ago. I was training some entrepreneurs in Milwaukee, and just over a year ago, last January, I was working with a guy, Gustavo from Ecuador, who should be the president of the United States because the guy is the great immigrant success story. He came to America, didn't have any money, worked every menial job on the planet, didn't even speak English, learned English. He basically saved every dime and invested in real estate. Now he's worth over $30 million. And so when we were putting together his presentation, we were putting together his pitch, and he has a 4-month coaching program in real estate, which is $40,000. And I'm like, wow, that's a big ask, Gustavo. But I say, there's two ways to get better at speaking. First of all, you have to watch lots of speakers. And then second of all, one of my mentors was a guy named Jim Rohn. And Jim used to say, you can't pay other people to do your push-ups. So you got to go out there and do the work. So I told him, you got to go out and speak. I mean, speak to elementary schools, speak to your church or your synagogue or your temple, speak to the Chamber of Commerce. I mean, go on podcasts, go on Facebook Live. And he said, well, I have a podcast I'm appearing on tonight. I'm like, well, you're going to make the pitch tonight, Gustavo. He's like, really? And I'm like, no, you're making the pitch tonight. Here's my phone number. Call me tomorrow. So Ali, he calls me up the next day. He's like, Danny, you are a genius. I'm like, did you go on the podcast? He's like, yes. I'm like, Gustavo, did you make the pitch? He's like, yes. I'm like, did you sell any? He's like, 23.
Oh, wow.
Ali, reading's my thing, not math. But if I'm doing my math correctly, he made $920,000 that night on a presentation we had created that afternoon. And since then, he and I still keep in touch every couple of months, and he's made over 8 figures off of one speech that we created for him. So that's the power of these things. And one of the things I love about working with immigrants is because I want you to take what you perceive as a weakness and turn it into your strength.
Mm.
You're going to be strong because you're an immigrant. That's how you're going to relate to your audiences.
Mm. I love that. That's very powerful, Danny. Thanks for sharing. So, Danny, how much do you believe when it comes to speaking? How much is given, let's call it talent, and how much is putting the reps in and what you just said,
Oh,
doing
it's
the
all the
push-ups
reps. I
and
mean, yeah, some people are born naturally, they come out of the womb and, they're like, yes, Simba, you shall speak. But most of us, the way we get better is by practice. It's a trainable skill, and the reps, it's all about the reps. I mean, I was speaking in India and I was motivating. I speak a lot to schools, and at this school, I was speaking to the kids. And this one little boy comes up to me. He's about 6 years old and he has tears in his eyes. And I notice he's missing his left arm. And he says, well, Danny, how can somebody like me succeed? And so I crouched down to his eye level and I said, well, when I was your age, I went to 18 different schools before I was 12 years old. Everybody called me stupid because I stuttered. And eventually I had a teacher who spent time with me, and she would sing things to me and I could sing them back without my stutter, kind of like the movie The King's Speech. And eventually I became a swan. But I looked at that little boy and I said, isn't it interesting that the little boy everybody used to make fun of because he couldn't speak right now gets paid ridiculous sums of money to travel the world to do what? And he just has this big grin. He's like, speak. I'm like, don't let anybody tell you what you can't do. Everything is teachable. Everything is learnable if you believe. So yeah, it's all in the reps.
That's amazing. So why would you say, so number one, does reading and speaking go hand in hand? That's my first question. And then I'll come
Okay,
back
right.
with my second question.
Absolutely. So it's ironic I'm considered America's leading reading ambassador because I grew up hating reading. I mean, my father was a librarian. I always hated the library growing up. All the furniture was uncomfortable. It smelled funny in there. There was always an elderly woman telling me to be quiet. There's always a crazy homeless guy who thinks he's a vampire hanging out by the bookshelves. I always hated the library. And it wasn't until I started teaching in the inner city in South Central Los Angeles where I saw a lot of my students didn't have the resources that I had growing up. And I basically said, shame on me. I was very blessed in life. And now I'm an avid reader, and I push it to anybody I meet. I'm finding out what they're reading, what they like to read. And the relationship between reading and speaking is, here's an exercise all of your audience can do. This is something when I'm training people how to create more engaging presentations. A lot of people say, well, nothing's ever happened to me. I'm like, okay, here's what I want you to do. Get out a piece of paper and a pen, fix yourself a nice libation of choice, sit in a comfortable chair, and for an hour, I want you to write down every story that's happened in your life. And I don't mean the whole story. I just mean, triggers. So like the time I locked myself outside of the grocery store, couldn't get into my car. The time I went to that restaurant with my dad and it was a fancy restaurant and he spilled mustard all over his tie. You'll come up with about 500 stories in just about an hour. So that's the first part of the exercise. The second part of the exercise is then what you do is you try and figure out, well, what's this story actually about? Oh, this is really a story about responsibility. Oh, this is a story about never giving up. And on my computer, I have hundreds, actually thousands of these stories and files. So whenever I have to give a presentation, I'm looking for anecdotes like that. Now, this gets back to the reading point we're trying to make. I was working with a woman. She said, nothing's ever happened to me. I'm like, well, all right, you're going to be difficult. Well, that said, if you look at one of the most popular personal development books of all time is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, in which he shares no personal stories. All of his stories are stories of people, of these millionaires that he interviewed. And I wouldn't know those stories if I had not read that book. I mean, I just read a book the other day. It was a horrible book, but there was one really good story in it, so it was worth my time to read the entire book. And so, it doesn't have to necessarily be books either. I mean, maybe just you're reading a journal article or a magazine article or a newspaper article, or I'm constantly creating a database of stories because if you want to be connecting with an audience as a presenter, it's these stories. This is why, like, your podcast is wonderful. You're giving people those stories. So there's an immigrant from Iran right now who's like, maybe I can be like Ali someday. Maybe I can do this. And I think that's really important. Is, actually the last book I wrote was called Leadership Begins with Motivation, and it's all these inspirational stories. And after I wrote it, Ali, I read it and I realized, completely unintentionally, most of my anecdotes are of white male Americans. And so the book that I just finished writing last week, most of the stories are about women, minorities, and international people, because I think it's really important that people hear those different stories, that they can see themselves in that person's in that person's eyes. I mean, when I was in India, I could motivate all those students, and it's powerful. But if I'm speaking to 5,000 girls, isn't it even more powerful if I'm a woman and they see that it's, or even more powerful if I'm an Indian woman? Then they're like, wow, I look like her. And I don't want to just say that that's everything, because it's not. I mean, you have examples from everywhere, but it is important. It's important to me that kids see examples from people just like them. That's a long answer to your short question about the relationship between reading and speaking.
Absolutely. That was a great answer. So, and then my second question is, okay, now somebody's like, okay, I get it. I have to read more, but I don't like it. I'm not a reader. How can we change that?
Yeah, so the research is very clear on this. It doesn't matter what you read. What matters is how much you read. It doesn't matter if you're reading James Joyce or James and the Giant Peach. People who read more read better. So if I'm an entrepreneur, maybe I don't really want to read Jane Austen or William Shakespeare, but I'm really interested in reading more about digital marketing and reading about successful immigrant entrepreneurs. And so those are I always tell people, read what you like. I mean, when I taught little kids, I had a 7-year-old boy, Kiara, and Kiara's first grade teacher told me, Kiara doesn't know anything. I'm like, well, thank you for that. Well, Kiara, who don't know anything, comes into my classroom one day. He's like, hey, Mr. Brassell, you see Barkley last night? He had 18 points and 16 boards. I'm like, thank you, Kiara, because from that point forward, Ali, every day after lunch, I'd sit Kiara on my lap and we would read the LA Times sports page together. And guess what? By the end of the year, Kiara was one of my best readers. And all that kid ever read about was sports. Now, do I think it's important to learn how to expand your reading beyond that? Absolutely. But first of all, you got to get interested in it. And so I work with a lot of CEOs. A lot of people don't know this. Over half of the Fortune 500 CEOs are dyslexic. People like Richard Branson, very famous dyslexic, but dyslexia is actually quite common. George Washington was dyslexic. Tom Cruise is dyslexic. So you're in good company. But what people have to understand is dyslexics process information a lot better with their ears. And so I say, well, don't read the book. Listen to the Audible book. It's just as good. The research is very clear on this. It's just as good to listen to it. So if you don't like reading, when you're driving in your car or working out at the gym, make that time to listen to this podcast, to listen to books about things that you're interested in. That's going to make you a better reader, a more informed reader. And then the thing that I always tell people think I know a lot. I don't really know that much at all. I go before parties, I go to the bookstore or it's the library. I go to the children's section and I find a bunch of picture book biographies of famous people and I read all about them. And then I say, oh, did you know this about Elon Musk? Did you know this about Indra Noory? And people are like, wow, you know so much. Well, I read a picture book, a 32-page picture book. You can get a lot of information that way, or just reading magazine articles. I read things like that all the time, just small little things. Heck, sometimes I'll get lost on I've made sure that my Twitter feed is only positive stories. So I only subscribe to people that are saying positive things. And there's a guy I was following and he had a whole thread yesterday about the wisdom he's learned from Bill Murray, the actor. And it was all these amazing anecdotes about Bill Murray. So that's reading. And I probably went down that rabbit hole for about 20 minutes just reading all these different threads that the guy had. So be very specific in what you read. And for the entrepreneurs out there, it's going to be about how do I increase my marketing and how do I have a more global impact?
Thank you for that. We get to hear that, Warren Buffett is reading this and this many hours a day. Bill Gates is reading this and this many hours a day. So, what is the relationship between reading and success, if
Yeah.
there is any?
Yeah, well, one of the things I'm going to provide all of your audience today is I'm going to give you everybody a complimentary ebook based on what I've learned about that. Read, Lead, and Succeed. It's a book. I wrote it for an elementary school principal who was trying to keep his faculty and staff positively engaged, and so I said, okay, I'll write you a book. So every week I give you a concept, an inspirational quote, an inspirational story, a book recommendation on a book you should read, but you're probably too lazy because you're an adult. So I also give you a children's picture book recommendation, demonstrates the same concept. You can get that at freegiftfromdanny.com,
Love it.
freegiftfromdanny.com. And inside that book, I show military leader. There's plenty of readers that don't necessarily become effective leaders, but I've never read about an effective leader that was not also an avid reader. So if you look at the military, Napoleon was a very well-read person. General Patton, General Schwarzkopf, these people, General Schwarzkopf, they say he could read in 4 languages and quote Shakespeare from the top of his head.
Wow.
You mentioned Bill Gates, Warren Buffett. I just read, I read the first biography on Elon Musk by Ashley Vance. And when he was a kid, Elon Musk was bullied all the time. And so he hid out in the library and at the bookstore until he had read every book at the library and bookstore. The kid, even today, he's running, all these multi-billion-dollar companies, and he reads at least 1 book a day.
Wow.
You see it in athletics. I just read a biography on Americans call it soccer. The rest of the world calls it football. I think the rest of the world is correct. So the football manager, Sir Alex Ferguson, who managed
Ferguson.
Manchester United for 25 years,
Right.
was an avid reader. His biography was talking about all the different things. And it wasn't just sports. He liked true crime mysteries, was fascinating to me. But he also read about the American football coach Vince Lombardi and how he shared his philosophy about coaching. The basketball player LeBron James, I could have kissed him when he was in the NBA Finals with the Miami Heat. They showed him in the locker room before the championship reading the Hunger Games, and I'm like, wow, you just did more for reading than I'll ever be able to do for reading. Entertainment. This is one of the ways I get a lot of kids reading is, if you like hip hop, well, there's lyrics to hip hop. You can read the lyrics to the hip hop. Jay-Z, this is what he was doing all the time when he built his empire. It's not like he's reading, again, he's not reading what schools deem is important to read, which drives me nuts. I hate that. Who defines what literature is? I mean, literature can be hip hop lyrics. It doesn't just have to be Mark Twain or William Faulkner. So again, that's what I'd really like your audience to get out of this is don't let anybody tell you what proper reading is. There's no such thing as proper reading. There's appropriate reading. What means something to you? I have a wife and 3 children, and I have different books I read with all 3 of them. Or excuse me, with all 3 kids and my wife. They have different interests, and so when we're reading together, I have to read. My wife likes. There's this great series of books called The Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon by Beth Brower. And there's 7 of them, and I'll read them to her in bed. My oldest daughter likes Game of Thrones. And even though there's some tense situations and some coarse language in those books, that's what she's interested in. So we'll read the Fire and Ice books by George R.R. Martin. My son, he loves military history. And so right now we're reading Patrick O'Brien's Master and Commander series, which I feel like I need a dictionary because every page I have to look up at least 8 of the words because it's all written in 18th century English. And then my youngest daughter, for some reason, she likes classic literature. So we just had to read The Great Gatsby, which I hate that book. But after reading it aloud to her, I realized, okay, that's Scott Fitzgerald. He can write a sentence every night. They're pretty good writer. I just don't like the story. But that's that. You and I, Ali, we're interested in being entrepreneurs, and so there's different books I'm going to talk to you about. And this is what I'm trying to do: is I'm trying to get everybody in your audience excited. Whatever you want to read about, heck. If all you like are football teams, you want to read about football, well, read about football. It's going to make you a better reader. I tell parents this all the time. The little boy who only reads Captain Underpants is going to become a better reader than the little boy who doesn't read anything. Captain Underpants is the gateway drug to Shakespeare, but you got to get the kid excited about it first. And I think if people would understand how to get excited about reading, they'd be more likely to read. And the more you read, the better you get. So once again, that's a very long answer to your short question, Ollie.
Danny, that was years ago, actually. I was like, okay, where can I improve when it comes to reading? Because I still believe I could be a faster reader. And then I came across speed reading. And then I was like, and then I talked to this lady who was going to teach me, and I had two other friends who wanted to join, and I don't remember, for whatever reason we decided not to do it. But what's your take on speed reading?
Oh, it's fantastic. I used to teach kids how to speed read. I can get anybody up, average readers can read up to anywhere between 250 to 750 words a minute. But I mean, I can get people up to 2,500 words a minute, but you're going to lose what you're always aiming for is at least 70% comprehension of what you're reading. Woody Allen used to make the joke, "Oh, I took a speed reading course. I just read War and Peace in 20 minutes. It's about Russia." Well, it's about more than that. We need to get into some more details than that. But really, one of the things you're training people when you're doing speed reading is you have to work the eye muscles to get them to work much more rapidly. And it's a skill that can be taught. It's just like speaking. This is something that you can get better at, just like memorizing information. I have friends that teach people that I have a friend, Jeff Flom. What's the name of his company again? Jeff has this wonderful speed reading company, and I can't, let me see if I still have it on my phone. No, I'll give it to you so you can put it in the show notes. I can't find it right now,
that would be lovely.
It's a wonderful course that, you can double your speed. You can double your reading pace in just under a month using that program. What's it? EYE, like IQ, I think is what it is. I can't remember, but it's fantastic. But yeah, speed reading, again, it's just like speaking. The more you do it, the better you get at it. But this is everything. It's the same thing with like your podcast, Ollie. The first time you did the podcast, you were nervous. You fumbled. You didn't know what to do. And now you're like an old pro, and you're all set up. You got everything. You have your routine. No big deal. My youngest daughter right now, I'm teaching her how to drive. And, before, when she gets in the car, she's adjusting the mirrors, and she has her hands are at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock position. I guarantee you within a year, she'll be putting on makeup, driving with one hand, eating a burger at the same time as she's driving. Because that's what happens is you just need to get the reps. You get used to it. Makes you a lot more comfortable.
Absolutely. Sometimes I catch myself when I'm reading, because I'm also someone who loses focus and concentration pretty quickly. I'm all over the place sometimes. Then I catch myself, okay, now I was reading for, I don't know, a minute, 2, 3, but I don't know what it was about. So let me go back and read it again. How can I improve that or get rid of that?
Yeah, I think what's good about that, the way I try to train people, so my reading program is, there's two numbers that are important, 67 and 20. So a lot of people say it takes 21 days to change a habit. To those people, I say, show me the research on that. It's completely fabricated. I know where the number comes from. It comes from a great book written in 1960 by Dr. Maxwell Maltz called Psycho-Cybernetics. In the preface to that book, Dr. Maltz, who was a plastic surgeon, said he noticed it took most of his patients about 21 days to get used to their new faces. Well, a lot of self-help gurus, a lot of people I admire, by the way, started telling people it took 21 days to change a habit. That number is not based on any research whatsoever. So in 2009, the University of London did a habit formation study, and they discovered it took anywhere from 18 to 254 days to change a habit, and the average was 66 days. Well, I don't like the number 66, so I threw in a bonus day, 67. 67 days to change your habit to make you a reader. And it depends on the type of habit you're trying to change, by the way. So if you want to drink a glass of water before breakfast, that might take 18 days to form that habit. But if you want to quit smoking, That could take 254 days to change that habit. And this is why this is important, Ollie. Let's say you go on a diet, you follow it religiously, but after 21 days, you fall off the wagon. Well, you blame yourself. And that's wrong because the research shows it takes at least 3 times longer than that on average to form a habit. So 67 days is the first number of my program. The second one is 20. So researchers were trying to figure out what makes students successful. And so they looked at habits that they had around the world, and they stumbled across something that they couldn't believe. It was the number of minutes spent reading outside of school. So they looked at the low kids, the average kids, and the high kids. The low kids, the kids at the bottom of the class, the 20th percentile, your failing students, they average less than a minute a day reading outside of school. That didn't surprise anybody. That's probably why those students are at the bottom of their class. But the next number did surprise the researchers. The kids in the middle of the class, the 70th percentile, C students, your average students, they average 9.6 minutes per day reading outside of school. And so if I'm doing a live training with parents, this is usually when the room gets really quiet and a person raises their hand and says, wait a second, are you telling me if I can get my kid to read 10 minutes a day, I can take him from an F to a C? That's exactly what I'm saying. There's a lot of research to support this, but the next number really blew away the researchers. The kids near the top of the class, 90th percentile, A-minus students, some of your best students, do they average 3 hours a day reading outside of school? No. Do they average 1 hour a day reading outside of school? No. The average was just over 20 minutes a day. 20 minutes a day for 67 days. These are the goals of my program. And there's 2 things that are important for people to remember. We already talked about one of them. The research shows that being read aloud to is just as good as reading on your own. So I tell parents, if it takes you 10 minutes each way to drive your kid to school, just put in an audio book and the kids are getting their 20 minutes going back and forth to school. The second thing, and this addresses your question in the long roundabout way that I love to do it, the minutes don't have to be consecutive. So you can do a minute here, 5 minutes there, 3 minutes there. I'll give you a strategy I teach parents all the time is parents, I have a feeling that television is here to stay. So I always recommend to parents, turn on the closed captioning on the television. And parents will say to me, well, wait a sec, if the subtitles are in English and the show is in English, what good does that do? I'm like, well, that's a fair point, but let me make a point. Have you ever watched a show with subtitles and not read the subtitles? It's very difficult to do. Your brain's actually directed towards the text. And there's research to support this. If you look at reading scores around the world, the more kids watch TV, the lower their reading scores are in every single country on the planet except for one. The country where kids watch the most TV also has the highest reading scores in the world. It's Finland. And people always ask me, well, how can that be? I'm like, well, because Finland makes really bad TV shows. And so what they have to do is they have to import all these old American TV sitcoms like Different Strokes and Good Times and Gilligan's Island, and they translate them all into Finnish. The kids are reading constantly. So at the very minimum, this is for you, Ollie, if you can't concentrate when you're watching TV, just have those subtitles on. That's actually going to help you out. But again, I think most people, the way they view reading is it has to be like, Dostoevsky, War and Peace, and it has to be 900 pages to count, and you have to read for 3 hours at a time. No. If you are, your cell phone, I see people reading constantly. People say, oh, people aren't reading. I'm like, people are reading more now than they've ever read in history. It's just they're reading in a lot smaller chunks. So if you're going on for an hour, a minute, just catching up on social media, that counts towards your minutes per day. If you're watching a TV show, those count toward your minutes. If you read you probably just like me, you'll read some AI article from some, Alex Hormozy or one of these big entrepreneurs. You'll go on there. It's about a 4-minute read. I can pay attention for 4 minutes. I don't know if I can pay attention for 40 minutes. But I can definitely pay attention for 4 minutes, especially if he's revealing something that might make me some money. So that's what I really want your audience to grasp out of this. And again, we're talking immigrants. I work with so many immigrants, and they have to understand this, at least in America. Immigrants to America usually know a lot more than most Americans because they're really motivated and they're trying to get better. This is what I loved about you. Right when I met you, you're like, oh, I want to learn how to get better. I mean, this is great. You know, when I speak to American audiences, I see a lot of people on their phones. When I speak to international audiences, I see a lot of people paying attention to everything I'm saying. And I've been warning a lot of American business owners. I'm like, get ready, because the internationals are going to start beating us at our own game pretty soon, because they're really hungry. And hunger, you know, it's one of my favorite speakers, Les Brown. You got to get hungry. And he's right about that. The reason I love working with entrepreneurs is I'm a pretty easy coach. I have a pretty easy 2-step process. My 2 steps are A, listen to me, and B, do it. Now, Americans, I often have people, well, I can't do, and they're always arguing with me. I'm like, okay, you're not coachable. Whereas my immigrants, you know, person like Gustavo, he listened to every word. He just followed the formula, and Gustavo did it. And I'm so proud of him for doing that. And I get to work with all kinds of, I work a lot with a lot of immigrants in Silicon Valley, a lot of Indian engineers, because one of my specialties, Ali, is adding humor to presentations. And a lot of, you know, humor is a tough thing, especially when you're an immigrant, to try and figure out how to engage your audience. And so this is an engineer, and he's very dry, and he's like, Danny, I need you to help me to make my speech funny. And he has a very difficult first name. His name is very difficult to pronounce. I'm not going to tell you his name, but it's something like Majarid Maharaji. It's a pretty difficult name. And so we changed his presentation. So the way he starts now is, hello, my name is Majaddin Maharaji. Gee, I sure hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And what that does is it gets everybody laughing and smiling, and he's just connected with his audience. You know, when you told me your story, Ali, about being an Iranian immigrant who lives in Switzerland and in Tampa Bay, this is so, you have no idea how powerful that story is. There's so many things that you can talk about, but that's what I'm always telling people is the way to connect to your audience isn't to share your successes. It's to share your failures, because not everybody in your audience has succeeded, but they've all failed. And the more you show your own vulnerability, they're going to love you for that. I mean, I'm working with a guy right now, and he's crazy. He's Iranian immigrant of all. He's an Iranian immigrant, and he's crazy, Ali. Every time I talk to him, no, like I was just talking to him the other day. He's like, oh, I got to go. I'm doing an Iditarod in Antarctica right now. And like I had talked to him like 3 weeks ago. He's like, oh, I'm swimming with sharks in Madagascar. I got to go. He's just the craziest guy. He's like, he's climbed all the 7 highest peaks on every continent. He's got 6-pack abs. He's a medical doctor. He's got a beautiful wife, beautiful 2 boys. And I'm like, nobody can relate to you, Badr. Like there's nobody can relate to him. What people can relate to is when you tell them, when I was in 1st grade, I peed my pants in class and everybody made fun of me. Oh, everybody had that happen to them, you know, and those are the stories that you need to connect. And it's very simple. It's, you know, another example. So when I was at university, one of my professors was a statistics professor from Britain, and he introduced himself. He has a very thick British accent. He's like, hello, I'm from Great Britain. He's about 4 feet tall. He's like, I came to America 20 years ago, went to the University of North Carolina on a basketball scholarship. And all of us are laughing because he's only 4 feet tall. He's making fun of himself. And that's what you do to connect to your audience is don't run away from who you are, because nobody can be better at being Ali than you, Ali. Like I would totally embrace that. And that's how people are going to connect with you. And the biggest problem I see with most speakers is they're trying to be everything to everybody. You don't need that. You don't need to do that. You know, I worked with a woman just last week, and her niche is she's a veterinarian for the horses for professional polo players. I was like, that's the smartest niche I've ever heard. That's a very specific niche. I mean, she knows exactly what she wants to do. As opposed to a person, oh, I work with entrepreneurs. Well, there's a lot of entrepreneurs. Let's break that down. You were smart, Ali. I work with immigrant entrepreneurs. Ah, that's good. You can break it down even more. I work with Middle Eastern immigrant entrepreneurs. I work with Iranian immigrant. I work with Iranian male entrepreneurs who are between 20 and 30. I mean, that's
Right.
smart. People don't understand there's actually a lot of people just like that. That's why I love children's books, because I always tell people there's a children's book written about every single problem you could possibly have. There's books written about bedwetting. There's books written about not speaking English well. There's books written about 9/11. There's books written about just about any. I've never found a children's book that there's not a single problem any of my students ever had that I can't find a children's book that relates to it. And so that's what's important. I don't even remember your original question. I'm getting excited about this, but I'm trying to share with your audience. I mean, embrace who you are. You know, Gustavo, he's not telling people, oh, I started off where I was worth $30 million. You know, nobody understands that story. They understand he came to America with next to nothing but the clothes on his back, didn't even speak a word of English, and he worked really hard to get what he has. People like that. I mean, I promise you, watch politicians. Isn't it amazing? I've never seen a politician that grew up middle class. They always grew up, oh, I was born in a log cabin. You know, the same thing with motivational speakers. Oh, I had to wash dishes in my bathtub. I'm like, really? I grew up in a garage. Really? Did you? I don't think so, but it sounds good.
Right. Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, Danny. So, you know, when it comes to that's, by the way, something was holding me back, not for a long time, thank God, but it was holding me back for a few days before I started the podcast. I was like, who would want to listen to me? And I'm not even, you know, English is not even my first language, not even second. And then I realized there are so many people that can relate to this.
That's
you know.
right.
So that was out of the way. I also believe that so many immigrant entrepreneurs would like to become better speakers, because that's also something that, you know, I feel, and also talking to many of them, I realize that that is something that they feel like, oh, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I'm not at the level when it comes to speaking gigs, at the level that I would like to be. So what is your advice for someone that is really smart enough, that is really skilled enough to be a good speaker, but still feels like, oh, you know, I don't have what it takes to be a good speaker?
Yeah, to those people, I just say, get out of your own way. Every expert started as an amateur. I mean, you know, I gave a presentation a couple of weeks ago, and this guy came up. He's like, "Oh gosh, I would love to do what you do, Danny." And I'm like, "Well, why don't you do it?" He's like, "Well, I couldn't. You know, you're so good. I mean, look at how quick you were at answering that question." I said, "Wait a sec. The question you asked me, 500 people have asked me that question before. So before I gave you that perfect answer I just gave, I had 500 opportunities to craft the perfect answer that made you think that I'm really this smart, because I'm not that smart, but I've had a lot of practice." And, you know, it's also great to just laugh about it. I can hardly wait for a year from now, Ali, because I'm going to look back at this interview. I'm like, oh, these are all the mistakes I made. Because you get better. That's the best thing about continuous education. It never ends. You should constantly be getting better. I love working with entrepreneurs because they're eager to learn. Your audience, you have a perfect audience. I want people that not only are they eager, but they're willing to do the work. I mean, one of my favorite poems, I have a little poems that I used to always share with the students. One of them is by James Albury, and it goes, oh, gee, and now I'm forgetting it. He dined beneath the moon, he basked beneath the sun, he lived the life of going to do, and died with nothing done. And basically, I'm always telling the students, I'm like, hey, Warren Buffett, he works 18 hours a day. You know, Mark Zuckerberg works 18 hours a day. You know, Michael Jordan works harder than anybody else on a basketball. He's in the weight room at 4 a.m, working his butt off, and then he's shooting. I mean, that's the secret. Everybody thinks there's a shortcut. There's not a shortcut. There's not a shortcut. The secret is lots of hard work and never giving up. And so all these people that they doubt that they can be speakers, well, this is what I tell them. I had a guy I worked with three years ago, and I said what I told Gustavo and everybody I work with. I say, hey, I want you getting out there. I want you speaking. I'm like, if nothing else, go on Facebook Live every day. He's like, who's going to watch me? I'm like, probably nobody. That's great because you're going to need the practice. And so he went on the next day, Ali, and one person, a woman from Ontario, Canada, accidentally watched him. Well, then he did it the next day. 3 people watched him. He did it the next day. He's done it every single day for 3 years. He now has 6,000 people in his community, and he didn't make 7 figures, but he almost made 7 figures last year. And that was because he was persistent. He did the work, and he's so much better. I mean, he's better than me, which is great. As a coach, I love that. My entire goal is I just want to be able to brag about you. Gustavo, I'm like, this guy is the greatest. I mean, I've never made $920,000 off a pitch I just wrote that afternoon, but Gustavo did because he got up there and he did it. And so all those people that feel nervous, and then embrace it. I was working with a woman. She was shaking like crazy. And I said, tell everybody that you're nervous and show that you're shaking because they're going to love you. Audiences, nobody wants to get up on that stage. There's statistics about this. They say that most people, their number 1 fear is public speaking. Their number 2 fear is death. And so Jerry Seinfeld, his joke is, so if you ever go to a funeral, more people would rather be in the casket than delivering the eulogy. And it's the truth. People don't like it. And so when they're in the audience, they're your fans. They're not your fans if you brag. That's why I don't like people bragging. They're your fans if you talk about how you've had to overcome a lot. That's when people are going to cheer you on. Nobody wants to cheer on somebody that, oh, I'm married to a supermodel. I have diamonds in my shoes. Everything works out for me. Children write essays about. Nobody likes that person. You need to be able to connect with people. And so this is what we're trying to do and so here's a ninja strategy for your audience. So I always tell people, and I said this earlier, there's 2 ways you get better at speaking. Number 2 is you got to do the work, but number 1 is watch speakers. I mean, I watch 10 speakers a day. I watch them in front of big groups, in front of small groups, in front of women, in front of men, in front of international audiences, in front of national audiences. One of my ninja strategies that I'll share with you is I watch a lot of award shows because when the person wins the Academy Award, they only have 45 seconds to give a speech. And I want to see if they can connect with their audience. Now, most people, they waste their time. They get up there like, oh, I want to thank God. I want to thank the Academy. It's stupid. Nobody pays attention. But every now and then, somebody connects. And so a couple of years ago, there was a guy by the name of, I believe his name was Joe Walker. He won the Academy Award for Best Film Editing. So this is Hollywood. Important people, actors in the audience. They don't care about editing. So you can see the audience. They're not even paying attention. And he gets up there. He's British and he speaks very slowly. He's holding his Academy Award. He says, a lot of people don't know this, but when phrased properly, the term Academy Award nominee can be used as an insult. Well, now the camera's showing the crowd, and you see people are kind of leaning in like they're paying attention to him. And he says, for example, yesterday, I got in an argument with my 17-year-old daughter, and she said, well, Academy Award nominee Joe Walker. All of a sudden, you see all the audience laughing. He gets off stage. Sandra Bullock wants to meet him. Denzel Washington wants to meet him. Brad Pitt wants to meet him. Time magazine said it was one of the highlights of the Academy Awards. That's the power of connecting. And what he did is this is why I'm a little bit different. There's a lot of speech coaches, they'll tell you, talk about those sad, negative moments. And I'm not that person at all, Ali. I'll tell you why. 3 reasons. First of all, the world just survived a global pandemic. Everybody's had some pretty bad things happen to them the last couple of years. I don't think we need to hear another sad story. I think we need more stories about hope. Second of all, what I'm teaching people is how to create what I call a stump speech. Some people call it a signature talk. You can call it peanut butter and jelly. What this is a presentation that you give again and again to introduce yourself to new clients, to new audiences. You can do it on a podcast. You can do it in front of 1,000 people. You can do it on the elevator. This is what we call a stump speech. So you're going to be giving this speech again and again. So I know a gentleman whose daughter was killed in a school shooting, and he tells that story every single day. I don't know about you, Ollie. You got to be stronger than me to talk about the worst day of your life 1,000 times a year. I have no idea how he does that. Third, this is where people get angry with me. When I go in to speak, I have one objective when I'm on stage. I want you leaving the room feeling better about yourself than when you came in. I want you laughing. I want you smiling.
Mm,
I want you happy. I can tell the same joke again and again. There's something admirable about my intention, which is to get you to feel better. I think when you keep on telling that same sad story again and again, by the 20th time, those are crocodile tears. Now you're just manipulating people. And I'm not saying it's not an effective sales tactic, because it is, but I don't like it. I think there's something very underhanded about it. I don't want to have to take a shower after I listen to you. I mean, and there's plenty, and I'm not going to name them by name. There's lots of people, and that's what they'll use as their tactic. I think it's very manipulative. That's why when I'm training people, the ethics in their presentation, I think the one person you should all read is Robert Cialdini, his book Influence or his book
right.
Persuasion. Those two books they're about ethical sales. How do
Mm-hmm.
you should only approach this from a win-win perspective. If it's not a win-win, don't do it. Everybody needs to
Mm-hmm.
feel good about this. And I like the integrity, which is lacking in a lot of presentations out there.
Mm-hmm. I
Again, I
love
went
that.
on a tangent.
That was awesome. By the way, which so it's actually both books of him are on my list. Which one
Oh,
would you
good.
go first? Persuasion or influence?
Well, I mean, either one is fantastic. He just came out with a newer edition of Influence, which goes through. I mean, the way I remember it is core sales for you. So the co is consistency, reciprocity. S is scarcity. A is affinity. Um, L is liking. S is social proof, and then U is unity. Those are his 7 areas that he wants to teach you. But believe me, if you only had any book on marketing as an entrepreneur, either of those books would be the one that I would get,
Mm,
because you're going to learn, just memorize them. He gives you case study. This is based on research. A lot of people give you
mm,
opinions. Cialdini gives you actual research. He's a professor emeritus at Arizona State University. He's fantastic. I've never met him, but I've been trained in Cialdini methods. And what I like is the integrity behind that. Is you shouldn't be sleazy. Any good
mm,
salesperson knows this. You don't sell a person a car
mm.
and feel good about it short term. You create a relationship where a person's buying from you for the rest of your life. It'll make your life and their life a lot easier too.
100%. And people these days are informed. They have the
Mm-hmm.
knowledge, they have the information. So if you're come across as this old sales method people have been using, you won't go far.
Yeah.
You might make a sale here and there, but people are. It's not like we're living in a day and age that people can have access to all the information, so they know what you're doing.
Yeah.
If you're taking them through the sales interview or whatsoever, it's not going to work any longer. That's what I
Yeah.
believe, at least.
Well, and then there's people. I mean, there are those people out there. I mean, I'm not going to name them, but I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and really, the groups that they really focus on are usually minority groups and immigrants and women.
Right.
I find it detestable. And
Uh-huh.
again, you still have to be able to go to bed at night feeling good about yourself. I think integrity and character matters. Um, and there are some people that just don't care. They just want to make the sale. But
Right.
again, I was making this point to one of my coaching clients the other day. Um, he said he wanted to be wealthy. I said, well, let's define wealth. Wealth is what you want. If you want money and you have a lot of money, then you're wealthy. If you want a
Mm-hmm.
good family and you have a great family, well, then you're wealthy. If you
Mm-hmm.
want freedom and you get to plan your days the way you want, well, then you're wealthy. So wealth is what you want. You have to define wealth. Society too often just defines wealth as money, but
Mm-hmm.
you and I both know the happiest people, it's not just about money, it's about other things. It depends. Some people it is about
Mm-hmm.
money. I've worked with those people, but I prefer the
Mm-hmm.
people. I always say it's better to go for freedom than for money. To me,
Mm-hmm.
I have a roommate of mine from years ago was bragging to me that he was able to take a vacation for a week in the Bahamas with his wife and his son. It was his first vacation in 3 years. And Ali, I went to my calendar from last year, and I'm not kidding. I'm like, oh my gosh, I spent 89 days last year alone on vacation with my
Wow.
family.
That's
So
awesome.
that, but again, wealth is what you want. That was,
Absolutely.
your scheduling, your scheduling and your bank account show what your priorities are.
Absolutely. So Danny, maybe someone is listening to you and I on this interview and it's like, hey, I like everything Danny is saying. I like, becoming a public speaker or a speaker. But I would like to know, can I actually make money as a business owner becoming a speaker? And if yes, how? So tell us how.
Yeah, I mean, basically, your speech is your business. This is how you acquire clients. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
some people like to get paid for their speech. I'm like, well, that's one way of getting paid for your speech, but another way of getting paid for your speech is offering a product that like Gustavo did. He
Mm-hmm.
spoke on the stage for free, which was a podcast. A podcast is a
Right.
stage. You have to start looking at your stage. I had a graduation party for my son the other day. Well, there's people in the room, and these are people that don't know what I do, so that's a stage. When you meet strangers in the parking lot, that's a stage. And so you have to define for yourself, well, what's your win? And so that's what we do when we're crafting your talk, is we give your audience one route to how to work with you further. And so I've actually already demonstrated in here. So the way I collect people is I said, okay, well, if you would like, as a thank you, I'm going to have all of you go to freegiftfromdanny.com. Well, when people do that, yeah, they're going to get my gift. But now I have a way of still communicating with you so that we can communicate long after this podcast. And that's what all of your audience should be doing, is how can people stay in touch with you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that. Danny, I could go on for way longer, but I'm gonna respect your time. I know you're very busy. And yeah, before we wrap up, is there any advice you would want to give our audience, immigrant entrepreneurs who are listening to this and maybe still something is holding back from really going after it, becoming a good speaker, opening up, exposing themselves? What's your advice?
Well, listening to your podcast is a very smart thing to do. So they're pretty smart if they're listening to you, because you're giving them those types of examples. I mean, you got to work hard, you got to read more, and never give up.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty basic. And I know that you're encouraging people, and they're listening to lots of different examples. And isn't it pretty cool, Ollie, that someday some of the people that have been listening to your podcast will be your guests talking about how they succeeded? So and that's why you do what you do. I mean, you have a heart. I only want to work with people, and that's the other thing, is get rid of nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
Don't work with people that are jerks. Life is
Mm-hmm.
too short. So, and that's, you're a good-hearted human being, and so I admire everything that you're doing, and you keep on doing it, Ollie.
Thank you so much. And that's why we're doing what we're doing, as you said. And thanks again for coming on the show. We will link you up in the show notes so people can reach out to you and connect and maybe get advice and learn from you. So once again, thanks for coming on and giving so much value to our audience.
Thanks for all you do, Ollie. God bless.
Thank you. Bye-bye.